I always thought afternoons in the repair shop were predictable: oily rags, the smell of burning rubber, the faint hum of fluorescent lights. But that Tuesday, something about the air shifted. I was bent over a carburetor when I felt it. The weight of someone watching, the kind of attention that makes you forget what you were even doing. She was there, leaning against the counter like she belonged anywhere she wanted. Mid-40s, sharp blazer, hair pulled into that effortless twist that somehow looked controlled and chaotic at the same time. She had this quiet authority, the sort that makes people listen without raising a voice. And yet, there was a softness in her eyes, a subtle twitch at the corner of her mouth, as if she were aware of secrets she didn't intend to share. "Still struggling with that?" she asked, nodding toward the carburetor. Her voice wasn't condescending, just aware, observant. And for some reason, I didn't answer right away. My hands, greasy and shaking slightly, felt heavier than usual. I glanced up, and our eyes met. Just for a second, or maybe a heartbeat longer. It was a pause that said more than words could. The hum of the shop felt louder, the scent of oil sharper, and suddenly the worn linoleum beneath my feet seemed foreign. She smiled faintly, tilting her head as though daring me to say something I wasn't ready to. "I could give you a hand," she offered finally, walking toward the workbench. Her steps were calm, measured, but I could feel the subtle pull of her presence, like gravity. I nodded, pretending to adjust a wrench while stealing glances at her hands, confident, delicate, capable. She didn't rush, didn't hover, just offered guidance in a way that made me aware of every small motion I made. We worked in silence for a few minutes. My fingers brushed against hers when she handed me a screwdriver. I jerked back, caught in the absurd gravity of a simple touch, and noticed her smirk. Almost imperceptible, almost teasing. "You're unusually tense," she said. "Is it always like this when you fix things? Or am I just intimidating?" I laughed, a little too loudly, trying to shake the unexpected flutter in my chest. "Maybe a little of both," I admitted. Her laughter followed, quiet and melodic, but it carried a kind of knowing that made me wish the moment could stretch forever. She leaned back against the counter again, observing me with that same layered look, the one that suggested she understood more than she let on. I wanted to ask her what she saw, what she thought, but my words stuck somewhere in my throat. Instead, I watched her, memorizing the curve of her smile, the way her eyes caught the dim light. When she finally turned to leave, she paused at the door. "Don't wait for me," she said, almost casually, like it was advice about a bus or a meeting, not about whatever invisible thread had been tugging between us. "I already am," I said before I could stop myself, and immediately wondered why I had spoken. She didn't answer, only glanced over her shoulder, a flicker of something, amusement, challenge, in her gaze. And then she was gone. I went back to the carburetor, but my hands were useless. The shop smelled the same, the hum of the lights the same, and yet nothing felt normal. I kept thinking about the way she'd smiled, the brush of her fingers, the pause before she left. Even now, hours later, I can't shake the image of her in that doorway, as if the whole world had narrowed to that single, fleeting frame. And I know I'll be waiting, whether she wants me to or not. I didn't expect to see her again so soon, but there she was, standing by the old espresso machine in the corner of the repair shop, frowning at a tangle of wires as if she were about to unravel the universe. "You know," I said, stepping closer with a rag in my hand, "sometimes the simplest fix is the last thing we try." She glanced up, just for a fraction of a second, and I caught a tired flicker in her eyes, the kind that doesn't reach the whole face, but lingers enough to make you notice. She gave a small, almost imperceptible smile before returning to the wires. Her hands were delicate but precise, moving with a practiced care. I watched the way her fingers flexed, how her nails, short and unpolished, caught a stray glint of the fluorescent light. There was a quiet strength in them, and a vulnerability I couldn't name. "You're too quiet," she said finally, without looking at me. Her voice was soft, but carried an edge, like someone who's lived through too many people watching without being seen. Not many can stand around and not talk. I shrugged, letting the silence stretch. I like listening, I said. You seem like someone worth hearing. For a moment, she froze. Then she let out a short laugh, more like a sigh escaping through her lips. It wasn't the kind of laughter that fills a room. It was private, contained, almost guilty. Something about it made me want to hear it again, even if only once. You're observant, she said, finally turning her gaze toward me, and I noticed a subtle tremor in her fingers as she adjusted the wires. There was a hint of fatigue in her posture, a subtle slump at the shoulders that she tried to hide with the precision of her movements. Just paying attention, I replied. I didn't move closer, didn't offer to touch or guide. I just watched, noticing the small things she didn't seem aware of, how she bit her lower lip when unsure, how her eyes softened when she looked at the machine like it was alive. We worked in silence, but it was a charged silence. The space between us felt like static, tiny sparks ready to jump, but waiting for the right moment. Every time she glanced up, there was a flicker, a hesitation, a question, a warning, and yet she didn't leave. When she finally straightened and leaned against the counter, wiping her hands on a towel, our eyes met again. That single look carried a quiet admission of exhaustion, of something she wouldn't say aloud. I felt my chest tighten slightly, the pull of something I wasn't supposed to chase but couldn't resist. You're good at noticing things, she murmured, almost to herself. There was a pause, a breath between us, and then she looked away, letting the silence reclaim the space. I wanted to say something, anything, to break the fragile tension, but instead, I just let my gaze linger, and she didn't stop me. Our proximity, our shared focus, the subtle brush of air when we moved, all of it felt heavy with unspoken words. As she finally walked toward the door, I caught the faintest hint of a smile, fleeting and guarded, like she was aware of the thread between us, but wasn't ready to pull it taut. And I realized I'd been holding my breath the whole time, waiting for her, even if she didn't know I was. And in that charged pause, I knew I would notice her, her hands, her laugh, the small tremor in her posture, long after she left the room. The rain had started while I was organizing the shelves in the back of the shop. By the time she walked in, the scent of wet asphalt mixed with the faint metallic tang of the repair shop. She shook off her coat, letting droplets scatter across the floor, and for a second, I thought the storm outside had nothing on the tension brewing between us. We ended up at the same workbench, her sleeves rolled up, hair falling loose in a way that made her look younger and simultaneously more composed than ever. I handed her a wrench, and our fingers brushed, not enough to spark, but enough to make me catch my breath and pretend it was the rain. You work too hard, I said, almost joking, though my voice was quieter than I intended. She didn't answer immediately. Her eyes traced the tool in my hands, the way I held it, and then she let out a short sigh. Maybe, she admitted. But there was a hesitation there, a gap where I felt she was weighing what to say and what to leave unsaid. The storm outside made the shop feel smaller, the walls closer. We were just two people leaning over a carburetor, and yet the space between us vibrated with something neither of us dared name. My hand itched to reach for hers again, to linger longer, but I pulled back, pretending to adjust a bolt instead. Then her phone buzzed, an abrupt intrusion. She glanced at the screen, frowned, and muttered something about a call she had to take. Her shoulders stiffened, the relaxed posture evaporating, and I felt the pull of reality snapping between us. Whoever, or whatever, was on the other end didn't matter. The moment had evaporated, and with it, the courage I hadn't known I'd been summoning. I noticed the faint tremor in her hands when she held the phone, the slight tightness in her jaw, the way her eyes darted away as if she wanted to vanish. I wanted to reach out, to tell her it was okay, that I'd be here, that nothing needed to be said, but the words lodged in my throat. Instead, I stood still, pretending to sort tools, watching her in quiet captivity. She hung up, shaking her head slightly, then gave me the barest of smiles. A private, half-apologetic smile that seemed to acknowledge the invisible line we'd been towing. The storm outside hammered the windows, but inside, it felt like we were holding our breath together, suspended in something just out of reach. I leaned slightly closer, daring, testing the fragile proximity, and I could feel the warmth of her shoulder brushing mine. She didn't pull away. Not yet. Not immediately. The air between us was thick, electric, and I knew I shouldn't, but my fingers twitched as if to reach for hers again. Then the door rattled, someone arriving, breaking the spell. She straightened, stepping back, and in that small retreat, the moment broke. My heart raced, and for the first time, I realized how careful I was about every gesture, every glance, every second of silence. And yet, for a heartbeat, just a heartbeat, our closeness lingered. The shop was quiet that evening, quieter than usual. The hum of the fluorescent lights felt intrusive, and the rain outside had slowed to a steady drizzle. She was sitting on a stool, arms wrapped around herself, watching me sort through spare parts with a concentration that felt performative, like she was holding back something she couldn't name. I finally set the wrench down, wiped my hands on a rag, and met her eyes. For a moment, nothing. The air between us was thick enough to taste, heavy with things left unsaid. "Do you ever wonder what we're doing?" she asked suddenly, her voice low, almost a whisper. I froze. The question wasn't about tools or work or even the storm outside. It was about us, about something I hadn't been able to put into words, something I'd been pretending didn't exist. I swallowed and shook my head. "I don't know," I admitted. She looked away, then back, and I saw the tension coiled in her shoulders, the faint tremor in her hands. There was exhaustion there, not just from the day, but from carrying a weight she hadn't let anyone see. I don't know if we should be here," she continued, and for the first time, her carefully maintained composure cracked just slightly. I wanted to reach for her, to say something comforting, but my fingers hovered in the space between us, useless. The silence was louder than any words I could manage. She shifted slightly, so close that the warmth of her presence pressed against me, but not close enough to be safe, and it made me acutely aware of every beat of my heart. "I don't even know why I keep doing this," she said, voice trembling now. "Why I let you stick around." She looked down, her gaze tracing the pattern on the worn linoleum floor. I saw a flicker of vulnerability that wasn't meant for anyone else, a private fracture in her armor. I wanted to tell her that it was okay, that I didn't expect anything, that I'd wait for whatever she was willing to give. But the words felt too fragile, too flimsy, to bridge the gap between us. So I just nodded, letting the silence hold our confession. Her lips parted as if to say something else, but the words never came. Instead, she exhaled slowly, a long, almost defeated breath, and the pause stretched between us like a rope pulled taut. I realized then that this wasn't about attraction or a fleeting connection. It was about needing, wanting, and fearing all at once. She finally stood, moving toward the door. Her hand lingered on the handle, and she turned just enough for me to catch the trace of a smile, fragile and hesitant. Maybe I'm not ready," she said, and the vulnerability in her tone cut through me more sharply than any storm outside. And then she left, leaving me in the shop with the lingering ache of her presence, the echo of her words bouncing in the quiet. I touched the spot where her shoulder had brushed mine, and I knew, in a way I couldn't articulate, that I'd never forget how fragile she could be, how devastatingly human. And I whispered to myself, almost unconsciously, why do I keep waiting for someone who won't stay? I wasn't expecting her to pull the small leather notebook from her bag. It looked ordinary enough, worn at the edges, but the moment she opened it, I felt the shift. Pages filled with neat handwriting, some words crossed out, little sketches tucked between notes, pieces of a life she rarely let anyone glimpse. "Did you ever lose someone you shouldn't have?" she asked quietly, not looking at me. Her voice carried a weight I hadn't heard before, a subtle tremor under her calm exterior. I hesitated. The question wasn't about me, yet it felt like a challenge I couldn't ignore. "I think everyone has," I said carefully. "Some losses, they follow you, even when you don't want them to." She paused, eyes tracing a page that had a photograph tucked into it, faded edges, a younger version of herself smiling at someone who wasn't me. She swallowed, and I saw a flicker of pain, a memory she hadn't shared. "I loved him," she admitted, voice barely above a whisper. And then I lost him. Not in a fight, not in an argument, just life happened. Her hands clenched the notebook as if it could hold the pieces together she couldn't fix. I wanted to say something, but the words failed me. So I just watched, the tilt of her head, the way her jaw tightened, the subtle catch in her breath. There was no dramatics, no collapse, just a quiet, human ache that settled between us like dust. You carry it well, I said softly. Most people, I don't know, they break under it. You just keep going. She gave a half smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. Do you think I deserve to? She asked, almost rhetorically. Or maybe I just survive. Her vulnerability hit me harder than I expected. I realized then that the connection I'd been feeling, this pull, this unspoken tension, was tangled with her history, her scars, her quiet endurance. It wasn't about attraction anymore. It was about understanding, witnessing someone's hidden fracture, and somehow being drawn to it. I reached out, almost instinctively, and my fingers brushed hers as she handed me the notebook to look at a photo she hadn't meant to show. I didn't pull back this time. The contact was fleeting, but it lingered, like an echo of trust forming in the space between us. She looked at me then, and for the first time, I felt her let down a piece of the carefully constructed wall she always carried. You make it easier, she said, and her voice was unsteady, quiet, sincere. The rain had started again, pattering against the windows, and I realized that everything outside, the storm, the shop, the lingering smell of wet asphalt, was insignificant compared to the fragile tension we'd just shared. And as she closed the notebook, tucking the photograph back inside, I felt the subtle quake beneath her calm surface, and I whispered to myself, almost without meaning to, I'll remember this moment and her. The shop smelled faintly of oil and rain, a mixture that had become strangely comforting. She was sitting on the edge of the workbench, sleeves rolled up, notebook closed beside her. I leaned against the counter, pretending to check inventory, but all my attention was on her. We didn't speak for a while. The quiet stretched comfortably, the kind of silence that wasn't empty but full of acknowledgement, of everything we'd felt and hadn't yet said. She shifted slightly, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear, and I noticed the subtle relaxation in her posture, the tiny exhale that carried months of restraint. I don't think we can pretend anymore, she said finally, her voice soft but steady. It wasn't a confession, not exactly, just a recognition of the tension that had grown between us, inevitable and insistent. I nodded, words unnecessary. The truth was clear in the way we lingered in proximity, in the way our eyes met and held, not flinching, not averting. It wasn't about romance in a storybook sense. It was about presence, acknowledgement, the quiet gravity of two people drawn together by circumstance, curiosity, and something neither of us could define but both recognized. I stepped closer, careful, measured, and she didn't pull away. My fingers brushed hers as I reached for a small tool she'd dropped, and we let our hands linger, an unspoken agreement that neither was going anywhere. The touch wasn't electric in a dramatic sense. It was grounding, real, intimate in its subtlety. We sat together on the workbench, shoulders brushing lightly, the shop around us fading into background noise. No words came, but the silence spoke volumes about trust, about recognition, about shared history and unspoken promises. She leaned just slightly against me, and I felt the weight of her presence, the quiet confirmation that she was choosing this, choosing me, without needing to declare it aloud. Her eyes caught mine, and for a moment, the layered walls she'd always carried seemed to soften, revealing something raw, human, and honest. I wanted to say everything, how long I'd waited, how aware I'd been of every small gesture, every tremor of vulnerability, but instead, I simply tightened my hold on the wrench, my hand brushing hers again, a quiet anchor. It was enough, more than enough. The rain outside slowed, the gray light of late afternoon spilling across the shop floor. Nothing monumental happened, no fireworks or declarations. Just two people, sitting together, letting the weight of their unspoken history settle into a shared present. And as she leaned her forehead briefly against my shoulder, a faint, almost imperceptible gesture, I realized the truth. This was no fairy tale, no instant romance. It was earned. It was messy and quiet and human, and it was enough. I exhaled, and she didn't pull away. Neither of us moved. And in that stillness, I finally understood we were here. Together. It's been months since that afternoon in the shop, yet I still catch myself remembering the small, quiet moments. The brush of her fingers, the way her laugh would soften a room, the silent acknowledgments that said more than words ever could. Life has moved on, and yet some things linger, shaping the way you see the world without even realizing it. I find her in unexpected ways, in the way sunlight hits a counter, in the hum of a machine, in the smell of rain on asphalt. She's not just a memory. She's the standard by which I measure patience, understanding, and quiet courage. I've learned to notice more, to speak less, to let presence matter more than declarations. And somehow, she's learned it too. We don't need grand gestures or dramatic moments. Our connection is woven into the mundane. Shared coffee in the mornings, lingering glances across a crowded room, the brief brush of hands when passing tools. The tension that once defined us has settled into something soft, earned, and enduring. There's warmth now, not the ache of longing, but the steady comfort of knowing someone sees you completely and chooses to stay. I see changes in her, subtle but undeniable. The way she smiles without hesitation, the ease in her movements, the unguarded moments she allows me to witness. And I see myself differently too, more patient, more attentive, more willing to embrace the slow unraveling of life without rushing to fix it. Sometimes, late at night, I replay the first day she walked into the shop. I think about the glance that held too much, the touch that lingered too briefly, the unspoken words that shaped everything that came after. And I realize that those early sparks weren't fleeting. They were the foundation of something quiet, real, and wholly ours. Love, I've learned, isn't always fireworks and declarations. Sometimes it's the small insistence of presence, the choice to stay, the courage to be vulnerable without needing the world to notice. And sometimes it's just a glance across a workbench that says, I'm here. I see you. I look up from the tools I'm sorting now and catch her watching me from the doorway, a faint smile tugging at her lips. And just like that, the world narrows again to a single, perfect moment. We don't rush. We don't announce it. We just exist, quietly, together, in a way that feels inevitable and whole. And I can't help but wonder, what small moments have shaped your own story today?